Karen Reed's jury foreman speaks out. Hank Brennan doesn't, not really. And in this edition of About the Law, your comments and questions. I'm attorney Andrew Myers, and by now you've probably heard that a couple of the jurors have in fact spoken out, the jurors that deliberated in the Karen Reed case. One of them, of course, was Paula Prado. She was the one that during the trial, we heard that there was actually an attorney on the jury. Well, she was the one. She is a Brazil attorney who moved to Boston area about a year ago, a little bit more than that. And so she's not an attorney in Massachusetts, but she's an attorney in Brazil. She's a very bright woman, gave some very incisive, articulate comments on how the 12 deliberating jurors looked at the case and what they looked at. And so since you've probably already heard from her, we're going to take a look at the jury foreman, who, even though he was less prominent, he had some good things to say. Remember, during the trial, we had heard that all the jurors were fastidiously taking notes except for one. Well, the jury foreman said he has a photographic memory, so he didn't have to take notes, unlike Sheldon, who has an eidetic memory. This juror, the foreman, asked that his name not be used. Obviously he doesn't want to, get a lot of problems from people in our society today, where people can take, pot shots at anyone on social media or elsewhere. But even though he said that he didn't want his name to be used, he went on the Today Show and elsewhere. And we'll take a look at a couple of different places he spoke.
It was the whole case altogether, all the pieces, testimony, witnesses, and it just a lot together. And people had questions. We used the evidence to answer their questions, and we didn't try to go down these rabbit holes where we're just getting lost in what all these other things that was thrown at us in court or whatever, and we just had to lock down and figure it out through the evidence.
And then he was asked an interesting question on the NBC Today Show. Thank you for the video. He was asked whether Karen Reed was in fact innocent in his view, or whether there just wasn't enough evidence.
Karen Reed is innocent, and she didn't do this crime. No one could prove that she did this crime, so I looked at her from day one as an innocent woman that needed to be proven guilty, and I don't think any of that was shown in this process.
And what he just said is, in fact, the standard and the way that jurors are supposed to look at a case. You're supposed to presume that the defendant sitting there in the courtroom before you is innocent until proven guilty. Actually, he was asked in this forum, whether who did it. And he pointed out correctly to the interviewers, that's not my job. The who did it is not my job. The job of the jury, as he put quite well, was looking at all the evidence, hearing all the evidence, based on all the evidence. Is there enough that confirms that the defendant is guilty beyond all reasonable doubt? So the interviewer, interestingly enough, did not use the right standard, and he did. I thought a much better interview was done in the Boston Herald about 4 days before the network got a hold of him, and the paper came out, and here's pretty much what he told the newspaper. This is the Boston Herald, which said that the Karen Reed jury foreman breaks silence, blamed cost, shoddy police work, no justice for John O'Keefe. That's the headline. The juror number one, who we just saw, tells the Herald that the case was littered with red flags. Juror number one, the foreman in the Karen Reed retrial, told the Herald there was no aha moment in the grueling case that he said wasted the taxpayers' money on paper-thin evidence that failed to bring any comfort to the victim's family. The unforgivable fact that investigators did not swarm the house at the murder scene on 34 Fairview Road in Canton during a nor'easter in January of 2022 was, in his words, shoddy work and a blatant, quote, red flag, the foreman added. That's why the only guilty finding against Karen Reed was drunken driving. Quote, if that body was on my front steps, I know my house would have been stormed, unquote, the juror, who is black and grew up in Boston's Jamaica Plain, said. The text from Trooper Proctor, and we're not going to say them, and the expletive, in fact, is in parentheses, he said, also showed a serious bias, yet I had to put my personal opinion aside. Quote, it all seemed like a lot of wishy-washy privilege, the foreman said. We had to look at the evidence, and a lot of it didn't make sense. There was no meat, no aha moment. No one proved there was a collision, even with all that jargon, and all the jurors agreed. Now imagine that. The Commonwealth spent all that money, millions and millions, for, Mr. Brennan as a special prosecutor, and also for the experts. And all the jurors, apparently, according to the foreman, agreed that no one proved there was a collision. Now, if that's not outrageous, I don't know what is. The juror, who asked that his name not be revealed, spoke with the Herald by telephone late Friday afternoon. That's only 2 days after the jury verdict, along with his wife. The couple has 3 children, and they have come painfully close to tragedy before. The juror said he knew both Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who, along with his terrorist brother Tamerlan, detonated 2 devices at the finish line of the Boston Marathon in April of 2013. And he also knew one of the victims, a young person. A juror's hesitation. The foreman added that the jury's announcement of a verdict on Wednesday that was suddenly pulled back. And here's the first real explanation that I've heard. I've heard a bunch of explanations, but this is the only one that really makes sense. He added that the jury's announcement of a verdict on Wednesday that was suddenly pulled back was over one male juror who got the jitters. At lunch, I asked the juror, "Are you okay? Do you think I can take back my vote?" he asked. Other jurors got a little nervous, the foreman added. But 20 minutes later, he said, "Okay, guilty of OUI." It was the only charge, of course, they all agreed on, and the only clear evidence without a doubt of any infraction, the foreman added. We only went with what was put in front of us, he said. Of the panel, 7 women and 5 men. Quote, I'm still asking, where is the justice for John, unquote. The juror further told the Herald that all the jurors quickly went their separate ways, but have actually agreed to get together at a later time. As a postscript to the story, the foreman of the jury shared with the Herald that he never took notes, a detail corroborated by their journalists. Quote, he has a photographic memory, his wife said over the phone. He had an instant command of every detail during our interview. What about collecting evidence? They did a very poor job, and that was a red flag for me, the juror said, alluding to samples put in solo cups not going into the Canton house, conflicting reports of taillight pieces, Sallyport doubts, and so much more. Another key element was the juror's youth growing up in Boston when police came under intense scrutiny in the infamous Chucky Stewart case. That was also a terrible night, as the Herald reported back then, in more ways than one. And a lot of us who lived in the greater Boston at that time, just, we shake our heads over that entire experience. And it's a horrible memory to bring back, but it does have to be brought back. It was 1989 when a white man, Charles Stewart, falsely claimed his pregnant wife, Carol DeMaty Stewart, was shot and killed by a black gunman. Boston was still healing from the busing crisis, and Charles Stewart preyed on that racial unrest, all to move on from his wife and collect her $82,000 life insurance policy. It all ended as a cowardly Charles Stewart jumped to his death off the Tobin Bridge, where police fished him out of the Mystic River. As the newspaper wrote back then on January 5th of 1990, the case that shocked the nation took an incredible twist as Charles Stewart leaped to his death 12 hours after learning investigators suspected him of terminating his pregnant wife to collect on her life insurance policy. That cruel ruse and blaming it all on a black man stuck with juror number one. The foreman, he said, if you're going to put somebody away for 20 years, he explained, you better have the proof. This brought it all back for me, he said, naming the Stewart case. I made sure I was looking at an innocent person first. Then I saw no evidence except for OUI, and we all agreed. So that is the standard. You know, I shook my head when I watched the network TV interview when they said, well, if Karen Reed didn't do it, who did do it? And we see that in the comments section, and that's fine. It's natural for minds that are curious to, wonder that. But as a juror in a case under the Constitution of the United States, that's not the standard. And that's not for the defense even to be required to point out. What the Constitution requires in any criminal trial anywhere in the United States is that the prosecution bears the very heavy burden of proving every element of every crime beyond all reasonable doubt. And so to ask, well, who did it? That's fine. The TV station can go out and hire people or get their investigators or ask Hank Brennan or anybody else they want to ask. That's their job. That's they can do that. But to ask a juror, what they think about, who did it, I don't know. I didn't think that it was a fair journalistic question. And I think it showed a lack of, thought on their part. But let's not harp on that. I said at the beginning that Hank was not speaking. Well, he is not speaking, but in fact, he did give a statement. He put out a statement to the press. Quote, I am disappointed in the verdict and the fact that we could not achieve justice for John O'Keefe and his family. District Attorney Michael Morrissey appointed me, Mr. Brennan, giving me full discretion to independently assess the case and follow the evidence no matter where it led. After an independent and thorough review of all the evidence, I concluded that the evidence led to one person and only one person. Neither the closed federal investigation nor my independent review led me to identify any other possible suspect or person responsible for the death of John O'Keefe. Well, you know what? I had a problem with this. First of all, Mr. Brennan's a sore loser. Second of all, what most of us will tell you after we have a jury trial, and anybody that has tried cases will tell you, sometimes you'll lose, and any trial lawyer that tells you they've won 100% of their cases, other than Perry Mason, will tell you, that it's just not possible. When you walk away from a loss where you've put in your own best effort, the more proper approach is to say, I respect the jury. Of course, I'm disappointed for my client, but I respect the process. I respect the court. I respect the jury. And I thank the jury for their very hard work here. 18 people got away from their daily routine for 8.5 weeks and went to the court and went through the process and had to listen to the fan and had to listen to the witnesses in the teeny tiny courtroom. And that's what you say. You don't say, oh, well, this was all wrong. And then it goes on from there. And by the way, at the beginning of this at the beginning of the process after which Mr. Brennan was appointed special prosecutor, I've told people I know the man. I reached out to him and said, Hank, what's up? He says, Andy, I can't talk to you when the trial's all over. I'll talk. Well, I reached out to him again, and he says, I'm not going to make a statement. I decline your interview. So anyhow, that's why we're restrained to this one kind of shady statement. The campaign of intimidation and abuse. All right, I'm not good at the voices. I'm sorry. The campaign of intimidation and abuse that has been waged, funded, and promoted in public and on social media is the antithesis of justice. So he's saying, we didn't get justice here. It's the jury's fault. It's the court's fault. It's somebody's fault. Even though the scales were tipped by all objective analysis, the scales were tipped. I think Alan Jackson said, when he was being interviewed by Howie Carr right after the trial, he said, this is the most challenging case that he has ever tried. And he also said that he had to restrict himself on what he said, but he did acknowledge that the scales were definitely tipped in this case. So for Hank to come out and say that, justice wasn't done is nothing more than sour grapes. If this type of conduct becomes commonplace, it will threaten the integrity of our judicial system, affecting both victims and the criminally accused. We cannot condone witness abuse, causing participants to worry for their own safety or that of their families. It is my hope that with the verdict, the witnesses and their families will be left alone. It goes on. It goes on. And if you really want more, and I doubt if you do, if you really want more, we'll pull it out in our next episode. And I would only say, before I move on to more enlightened things, including the comments of our viewers, I would invite Mr. Brennan one more time, last time. And I don't know, it just seemed to me like sour grapes on the part of Mr. Brennan. And so now we come to our viewers' thoughts and comments since the end of the trial and since our last episode after the trial. And here's what people think. We start with Pat Hacker. Please don't hack my computer. Please, we don't need it. I hadn't watched the first trial before this one. I have now gone back and researched it. I am amazed at how sloppily they handled all the evidence. They can't say for a fact where Proctor got John's phone and how long he held it until it was analyzed. Their case is based on smoke and mirrors. Oh, and an inverted video, which we're seeing right there. And there are just so many questions. So many questions. Why didn't they? Yeah, I know it was a blizzard. Seal off the crime scene. They didn't do it. They used a leaf blower. Really? The court would not allow the FBI crime scene expert analyst, Michael Easter, on the stand. So, yeah, the case was based on smoke and mirrors. Alice, it is mine. Seeing Yannetti cry made me cry. Yep, at the very end after the verdict had been read. It was a moment. These lawyers and everyone who volunteered their blood, sweat, and tears to fight for this case should be proud of themselves. The Commonwealth didn't make it easy, but justice finally won. And I have to say, you and the other law tubers did much better coverage of this case than the legacy media did. I followed you. And okay, I'll give credit where credit is due. And this viewer pointed out Melanie Little, LYK, EDB, Brother Counsel, and Mark Bederow, who we were lucky enough to have on our podcast a number of times. Shout out to Mark. Thank you. Number 8, comment, KP-1971. So happy for Karen, her family and friends, her legal team, YouTube supporters, and Dr. Turtleboy. Justice for Karen at last. Hope they find the real killers now of John O'Keefe. Okay. Number 7, Shaza B. Andrew, I hope you got to hear Bill Reed extend his thanks to you in the long list of people he specifically thanked during his brief interview with Howie Carr after the verdict. It takes a village. Karen Reed is free. No, I didn't hear it. I listen to Howie all the time. I'm a fan. I've been listening to him since the early 1990s. During one of the legislative pay raises, which was just crazy. And so I've been listening ever since. But I've been told about it. So thank you. Number 6, Teresa Voigt. Now she faces a civil trial. What will they try to prove? Well, yes, there's still a civil trial. It was brought by members of the O'Keefe family against Karen and the 2 bars where they were shown to have been served that night. And fortunately or unfortunately, the standard of proof in a civil case is much lower than a standard of proof in a criminal case. In a criminal case, the prosecutors face proof beyond all reasonable doubt, which is up here. In a civil case, the standard is by a preponderance of the evidence, which is really more likely than not. And as our evidence teacher taught us all those many years ago, it's just beyond the 50-yard line, just beyond the 50-yard line. So It's possible it could go either way. It's possible that the insurance company will just cave because, they're going to take a cost-benefit analysis, as all insurance companies do. How much will it cost to defend the case, try the case, do the depositions, do the discovery, versus just doing a payout? That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, really for defense attorneys in the case, look at the fact that the jurors were unanimous that a collision did not occur. So how can there be a payout that Karen Reed is liable in a civil context if there was no collision? That would make no sense. That would make zero sense. And so that's with regard to the civil case that has been brought by the O'Keefes against Karen Reed and the two bars. A totally different question, which we have received in the past, is what about a case by Karen against law enforcement for civil rights violations? Well, that's a tougher argument to make. I mean, that there were, flaws and holes and gaps and, outright corruption in the law enforcement investigation. I think there's no doubt about that. In a civil rights case, the standard is not negligence. It goes much higher than that. I've worked with an attorney who's a specialist in that, one of the top 10 attorneys in Massachusetts, according to Mass Lawyers Weekly. And I spoke to him the morning that I'm recording this, and I hope he agrees to come on and explain that, because we want to understand what Karen Reed would face in a case like that. There's no question that law enforcement screwed the case in this case. I almost said something else. But the difficulties procedurally and substantively in bringing a 28 U.S.C. 1983 case are substantive, and I'd like to address that in another episode if I can get the attorney that I've worked with to comment about that. So, number 5, Evelyn Mahoney. Brennan's demeanor was offensive with some of the witnesses. What did I expect, right? He's not the defense. Lally was mostly annoying. 4. Number 4, Pat Hacker. Again, okay, we did this one already. I don't know. Whoever did these slides, they've got to pay attention. Number 3, Judy Hawkins. I absolutely agree. Karen Reed and Sandra Birchmore are not the only people to face this kind of systemic corruption and failure of justice. I also think that there are lots of people, lawyers, police, lay people in Massachusetts, who are as honorable and responsible as all the best people we've seen in this case. But even a small number of investigations and cases as poorly conducted as these two, that's too many. And we need all the people in the justice system to do their job honorably and to figure out how to dig out and get rid of all corruption and dishonesty in our system. And I would agree with that. I also said, I don't know if it's going to happen. Corruption is deep and broad in Massachusetts. It's been around for years and years and years. As an example, the re-election of Mayor Curley from a jail cell in the 1930s. And I've talked about other cases and how endemic it is in Massachusetts. Number 2, Judy Ostrom. So freaking happy for Karen. Sad that the McKeefs are not getting justice until the McCabe's, Alberts, and Higgins are on trial. I would agree with you, but Judy, don't hold your breath. And our number 1 comment this week, Tony Stevenson, a regular on our podcast here. Now Brian Kohberger needs to be found not guilty. Total law enforcement expletive deleted show there too. Yep, we've been following the Kohberger case for quite some time, and we're going to gear up now that the jury selection is scheduled in August. The trial is scheduled in July. So yeah, we'll be spending some more time on that. This is probably the last time we will display this list of 72 countries. The world is, in fact, watching the Karen Reed case. They watched the trial. They watched the pretrial machinations. They've watched everything. And here on this channel, we have received comments and questions in our comment section from people in 72 countries. And there they are. And finally, the entire USA watched. One day, I'm going to say about 2 months ago, people kept hounding me to Keep track of the states. Watch the states. Keep track of the people from the states that contact your show. And so we did that. And within 2 weeks, we got all 50 states, District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and Guam. And so, again, that's probably the last time we'll show those slides, unless something really compelling happens, unless a lot more people come forward. The jurors are coming forward, and that's a good thing. You know, in our system of justice, there's no obligation to the jurors. You're protected. Doing jury duty is a difficult thing. It takes time. You're away from your family. You're away from your routine. You're away from your work. You're away from whatever your daily, weekly routine is. And then you're thrown into a room with 11 other people to deliberate. And, you know, that must be hard if you have an opinion. If you have served on a jury, any jury, and you would like to talk to us, give us a brief interview, we'd love to have you do that. So please contact us down in the comment section down below and let us know that you would be willing to talk to us. So this is our midweek episode. That's what we usually do. We started out just doing weekend editions, and that's all we did for the longest time. Then we decided, let's do a midweek episode, and all we're going to do is read the viewer comments and questions. And then it's evolved to this during the Reed trial. Things happened so fast, so quickly, that we decided to throw a few cuts. For a while, we did the Witness of the Week. We had Lieutenant Paul Gallagher. We had Yolie Medina. We had, good grief. We had Kelly Dever, Don't Call Me Devers. And so this midweek episode has kind of morphed. So let us know. There's a lot of stuff going on in the Sandra Birchmore case, Enrique Delgado, a lot of other things nationally. So let us know down in the comment section what other cases besides Kohberger that you would like to have us take a look at, because there's just so much nationwide. And again, I don't have the capacity to be able to go 9 to 5 Monday, Friday, because I am still, practicing law, and I have a lot of duties and requirements and clients that need me. So I need to get back to that now, as a matter of fact. And so with the limited resources that we do have here on this channel, I'd like you to let us know, what it is that you'd like us to follow. So if you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. And I don't know what we're going to have for an emoji this week. How about lemonade? Because if you're thrown, a pile of lemons, the point of life is to make lemonade. So again, I thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Whether you are in the grocery store, the gas station, or anywhere else, please remember to be kind to people. You don't know what they're going through. And the same goes for our comments section. We want you to comment, but be nice, be kind, be positive if you can. And thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Have a good one.